Oh my goodness, guys, we are at the end of chapter 15. I debated on breaking this video up into two shorter ones, but if I did that, it was going to just be open-ended right in the middle. So I'm just making it into one long one, and we're going to call it a day with chapter 15. So we've been talking about Darwin and his theory of natural selection through evolution. We talked about how everyone was pretty against it at the time, especially everyone that was involved with the church, because it pretty much said that we have been evolving for millions and millions and millions of years rather than the church teachings, which is more of thousands of years. So people were pretty against Darwin at that time. And at the same time of Darwin, there was another guy, and his name was Alfred Russel Wallace. And he came up with a lot of the same teachings as Darwin, a lot of the same theories through a lot of his research. Problem was, okay, Darwin got all the credit because Alfred Russel Wallace was actually kind of scared to release a lot of his stuff because he didn't want that confrontation with all the different groups. So that's why Darwin gets a lot of the credit for evolution. But anyway, both of these people noticed that species seemed very similar and they were well adapted to their specific environments that they lived in. So we're going to go over three different structures here, guys. The first one is called homologous structures. And if you remember, there's that prefix homo again, and homo means the same. Okay, well, what is the same? Is the structures the same? What's the same with these structures? Okay, so here's what it is. It's saying that these organisms came from the same common ancestor. It might have been like, 1,000 years ago. It might have been 5 million years ago. But somewhere down the line, they came from the same common ancestor. The sooner, the sooner in history that they kind of diverged into two different groups, in other words, the shorter that they had this common ancestor, the closer these structures are going to look. Let me give you a picture of this because this will be so much easier. So if you look at all these different bones, we've got the human, we got the horse, we got the cat, bat, bird, and whale. If you look at, and I'm not worried about the size right now, but if you look at the just structure of the hand or the flipper or the wing, but if you look at the bone structure, it's actually all the same pieces. We just have different lengths, okay? If you look at the humerus of the human, which is the top bone there, which is darker colored, okay? The horse, the cat, the bat, the bird, and the whale all have that same exact bone. It just is a different length. So they think that all of these organisms actually came from a common ancestor way, 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 way back. And they had time to, change the structure, okay? But if you look, the structure is fairly the same. Now, with homologous structures, and this is the important part, guys, with homologous structures, the structure, the internal structure is going to be the same. But the function of these is going to be different. So if we compare the functions, humans, we can do whatever we want with our hands. We can move them any which way. Okay, but if you look at the whale, I mean, that's going to be a flipper, so it's just going to move more of an up or down. It's going to be a different function, okay? So homologous structures, same structure, different function. So that's your first structure we got to go over. Our second one is called analogous structures, okay? Their function is going to be almost identical. However, they're not going to have a common ancestor. So an example of this, bat, bird, moth, okay? If you look at these three here, okay, the bat, the bird, and the moth, they are analogous structures because they have the same function. They're all three of them are used for flying, okay? But they don't share a common ancestor. So what does this tell us about analogous structures? Well, they evolve based on the environment, okay? The bat, the bird, and the moth all evolve based on the environment that they live in. They needed to fly. So those structures evolved because of that need, okay? So homologous structures, same structure, different function. Analogous, it's the opposite of that, okay? Same function, different internal structure. And the last one is called vestigial structures, and these are the easiest ones, guys. If we were to go through the transitional species of us and other organisms, we would see a lot of different structures that we no longer need, okay? Human tailbone, this is a vestigial structure, okay? Because they think that the human tailbone was probably once a sort of a attachment point for a tail that we once had. Okay, now not us, not humans, but one of our common ancestors down the line. Okay, so we didn't need the tail anymore. We got rid of it. Okay, so that is going to be a vestigial structure. That's a tailbone. That's what's left over of our once tails. The whale pelvis. The whales once had back legs. They no longer have them, but that pelvis is still left over so that it could be a hinge point for those back legs. All right, but they no longer have the back legs. And the last one is kind of a vestigial structure, but kind of not. It's our appendix. It's attached to your intestines, and it's thought that they pretty much don't do anything other than give you appendicitis now, rupture, and oh crap, you got to go to the doctors and get an emergency surgery. Okay, but they're actually finding out a few different things. One, it could be used to store blood, or it could be used to store bacteria. And that bacteria in the appendix, if you need it, it's good bacteria. The appendix will actually, squeeze and release that good bacteria into your gut. And whatever the bacteria needs to do, it'll do. So that's just, it's kind of still a vestigial structure, but not so much anymore because we're finding out there's uses for it. Along with that, I like this picture down here. There's the whale pelvis you guys can see. There's our tailbone. Wisdom teeth, we get them removed. Okay, vestigial structures, we still have them. Maybe down the line, thousands upon thousands of years from now, we won't have wisdom teeth anymore. I know some of the population doesn't, but yeah, we really don't need them. This little guy here, okay, this is technically a vestigial structure. It's a fun name. It's called the lacrimal caruncle. And they think this was once our third eyelid when we were underwater. Now that's the remnants of it. This, it's not like one of you guys can take it and be like, okay, I'm going to push it over my eye. No, it doesn't work like that. In fish, that third eyelid is called the nictitating membrane, but the lacrimal caruncle no longer really serves the third eyelid purpose that it once did for us. But why is it still there? It's in a very small remnant. It's still there though. Well, they're finding that its actual function is to take the sleep, that crusty stuff when you're sleeping and you wake up, and it all condenses right in that little lacrimal caruncle. So that way you wake up and you can still see. You don't have all crust on your eye. So still function kind of. Okay, so we're going to go over some different traits that organisms share. Okay, some of them are going to share more traits than others. Okay, and we'll go through those. So you guys already know DNA, RNA. These are our different molecules that we use to show our traits. Okay, some of these we're going to share with a whole bunch of traits within organisms. Some of them we're going to just share a few. The greater that number is, the more closely we are related to that other organism. So if you look at this chart here, this is amino acid differences. And if you guys remember when we went in class, we went from DNA to RNA to amino acids. So the amino acids are pretty much like 3 DNAs together. But all the DNA is going to encode for our proteins or our amino acids. But if you look here, we have our number of amino acid differences in just a stretch of DNA, okay? Now, if you look at the chimpanzee, we have 0, which means we're really, really closely related to the chimpanzee. But if you look at the monkey, we have 1, so we're getting further away. And as we get to yeast, which is the stuff they put in bread to make it rise, we got 42 amino acid differences, which means we are hardly related to yeast. So if you look at the questions here, which species are we mostly related to? Well, that's the chimpanzee, because we have 0 amino acid differences. Between a fruit fly and a pigeon, which is more closely related to humans? So fruit fly, pigeon. We got our fruit fly, which is down here with 24, pigeon with 12. So we'd be more closely related to a pigeon than a fruit fly, okay? Now, I know that's kind of weird. It's like, oh, Mr. Communal said that we are closely related to pigeons. No, I didn't. We're just closer to them than fruit flies. It's not like, a pigeon's coming over for a family dinner, and sharing a meal with you guys. It doesn't work like that. All right. Which species is most unlike humans? That's going to be your yeast with 42 different amino acid differences. And they'll make these things up, guys. This is called a phylogenetic tree or a cladogram. and it'll show how closely related you are to another organism. So if we do the human and let's say the dog here, okay, they are fairly closely related compared to the lamprey, which is an underwater fish, and they have a jawless mouth. And look up a picture of a lamprey mouth online. It's absolutely terrifying, okay? But the further away we go, the less related we are to that organism. And again, just like we went over last video and the video before, each one of these little nodes here where it separates almost forms a Y looking thing. That's going to be a common or a transitional ancestor in that area that we may have fossils for. We may not. Probably not, though. Okay, so modern synthesis. We had Darwin, and we also had Mendel. If you remember, we talked about Mendel chapters and chapters ago. I think it was in chapter 9. But Mendel was the genetics guy. And now we got Darwin talking about natural selection. Well, modern synthesis is the blending of this. So in other words, if we take Mendel's genetics together and we take Darwin's theory of natural selection together, we can form them together, and that's actually how we evolve. We get some mutations through genetics, and that causes genetic variation. And in natural selection, we have whatever is different between us. And some of us, now not for humans, but like in the animal kingdom, some of those organisms with the better adapted traits are going to survive. Other ones are going to die. Put these together, that's how we have our population. And here's the phylogenetic trees, or the cladograms, or dichotomous keys. You can call them all different types of things, guys. But that was from the other slide. And this just shows you the relationships between us and other organisms. Okay, we're good here. And here is our last section of chapter 15. All right, I really like this section, guys. It tells us a little bit with how, like, if not us, but like different animals and reptiles and stuff like that, if they look the same, you know, are they really related? Do they share an ancestry past? That's what we're going to go over in this section. So if we go down to the Caribbean islands, okay, Cuba, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, all that area there. Yeah, it's quite lovely. The water's beautiful, right? But there's these anole, or some people call them anole. I don't like that. We're just going to call them anole. There's these anole lizards, and they live in the Caribbean islands, okay? Some of them are going to be up in the trees. Some of them are going to be in the grass, all right? And they look almost identical. Their legs are a little bit different shape depending on if they're up in the trees or they're down in the grass. But here's the differences between them. Different color, okay, because they're going to be adapted to whatever environment. You know, if they're up in the trees, they're going to be more brown. If they're down in the grass, they want to camouflage themselves. But anyway, so the body shape is very, very similar between these anole lizards. So they came up with two hypotheses. Hypothesis one is that pretty much they were related, saying they had a single ancestor. The ancestor went to, once it reproduced, these ancestors went to different islands, and whatever was at that island, whether there was more trees or more grass, they became adapted, and the ones that weren't adapted died. That's the first hypothesis. The second one was that they were two completely different species, and they evolved to actually look very similar, okay? So how did they test this hypothesis? They looked at the DNA between the two anole lizards, so they extracted it and saw how many amino acid differences there were. If there's a lot of amino acid differences, they probably aren't really related, and that probably goes with hypothesis 2. If there were very little DNA differences, that means that would go with hypothesis 1, and that they did share an ancestral relationship. So after DNA analysis, guys, they found that there was a bunch of amino acid differences that tells us that the anole lizards are actually not related, and it's just by the environment that they look the same. All right, so this is a different type of evolution. Instead of us doing, get a pen out here. Instead of doing the common ancestor, the Y thing here, okay, where they had some kind of common ancestor here, here's the one anole lizard right on this side, and then here's the other anole lizard here, them sharing an ancestor. It wasn't like that. They actually evolved independently of one another. So they would have completely different phylogenetic trees or completely different cladograms, the two lizards. So this whole thing with them evolving separately from one another, This is, in other words, separately like that, okay? Not the Y shape. This is called convergent evolution, okay? So this is where completely different species are going to evolve similar traits based on the environment they live in, right? If you look at the shark down here and the dinosaur and the dolphin, all right? Shark is a fish, dinosaur is a reptile, and the dolphin is a mammal, all right? They all look the same. They all have the same flippers, but their DNA sequences would be completely different than one another. It's just because they all lived in water. They all had a need for the flippers, and they didn't really have a big need for back legs, so they didn't have very big back legs. All right, so they evolved independently of one another, but they look the same. That's convergent. All right. Another example of this, guys, would be the falcon, which is a bird, the bat, which is a mammal, and dinosaur, reptile, okay, the different pterodactyl, the bird. So they all were completely different species. They're not related at all, but they all flew. So their wings all formed independently of one another. That's another example of convergent evolution. Divergent, this is the one we've kind of been going through with like humans and monkeys and all that stuff. Again, guys, we did not come from monkeys. Okay, we share a common ancestor with monkeys. In other words, you know, if we're looking at this thing here, humans would be on this side, monkeys would be on this side. Before this, humans and monkeys did not exist. So this little common ancestor here would be something that would be human and monkey together, you know, before either existed. So that's divergent evolution. And divergent evolution species, so the humans and the monkeys, they're going to share a lot of similarities in the DNA. A good example of this, guys, is the lizard. Okay, if you look at all these different toe pads here, if you take my AP class, we'll go through a whole example of this. But counting the toe pads can actually help show the evolutionary background of these organisms. Okay, so if the toe pads are very close together in number, their DNA is actually probably close together. If their toe pads are very different in number, you know, it's going to be the opposite. Okay, adaptive radiation. We're almost done here, guys. This is when a new population in a new environment will undergo divergent evolution and are to fill all the empty holes in that environment. Okay, let me give you an example of this. Let's say hypothetically we have a bird and, I don't know, some insects, and that's pretty much it. Okay, and we'll throw some grass in there too. All right. So we have these little insects. They're real little. Okay. Let me attempt to draw it here. Okay, we got these little insects. All right. And I cannot draw a bird at all, but here's your bird. I don't know why it's looking like a duck, but that's okay. All right, that's my best bird I got. Okay, so let's say that these insects are so tiny that the bird can't really feed on them and actually get full. All right, we'll say these are big birds. Well, the insects will feed on all the nice little grass, okay? So put some grass in there. All right, there's my lovely grass, yeah. The insects will feed on the grass. So that's how the insects stay alive. But the birds aren't getting enough food from these little insects. So what will happen here, guys, is we will actually have some other organism come in and feed on these insects. So we'll just say it's a bigger insect, okay? So that way this insect will eat these insects. This insect will eat the grass, and then the bird can then eat this insect, all right? That's adaptive radiation. In other words, filling all the parts of that environment so we don't get overpolluted with one organism, okay? Here's another example of it, guys. We have this wombat-looking creature in the middle there, and it gave rise to all these different organisms. Some, you know, closer in history, some further away. Obviously, that little wombat thing isn't going to give rise to the walking elephant over here very quickly. That's going to take millions upon millions of years. Artificial selection. That's a canine dog on the left side. Okay, that is a talented dog right there. Yeah. All right. But anyway, so artificial selection is when humans choose which animals or whatever are going to parent the next generation. So, I think these dogs are pretty good looking. I like beagles as well. All right. So, we can choose, all right, look, this beagle looks amazing. All right. We can take the beagle and say, you're going to reproduce. Right. But then again, if you get a poodle in there, a poodle, I don't really like poodles. I don't think they're the cutest dogs in the world. I might say, hey, poodle, I don't want you to reproduce. This is humans choosing on who's going to reproduce and who's not. Okay. Scientists analyzed a bunch of dogs, guys, and they found that they actually share a lot of DNA with wolves. Last thing, coevolution. This is when two or more species have evolved based on one another. If you look down there at the bird and the flower, that bird eats nectar from the flower, and look at its beak. Its beak has evolved to go into that flower. If you go on the other side, the hummingbird, all right, the hummingbird, the flower that it feeds on, the nectar is probably all the way down in there. So its beak is extremely long in order for that beak to go all the way into the flower and get that nice nectar. All right, so that's coevolution, two organisms evolving in response to one another. Another example of coevolution, which this is kind of good for us, but at the same time not good. We keep getting all these antibiotics to kill bacterial diseases. So we'll make the antibiotic, and then taking that antibiotic will treat the bacteria. Well, in treating the bacteria, some of the bacteria will actually live. And those bacteria that live are called antibiotic resistant. And if they're antibiotic resistant, the antibiotics are not going to kill that bacteria. So those bacteria survive, reproduce, and form such great numbers that guess what? The antibiotic doesn't work anymore, and now we got to make a new one. And that process is just like a cycle, and it keeps going around and around. That's why the same flu shot doesn't work every year. The flu shot, I know it's a virus, not a bacteria, but the flu evolves every year as well. So that's why they're always constantly making new flu shots. All right, so we already went over this one with the resistance. Okay. So many flowering plants, guys, I know we already went over the example with the beaks. So they've evolved so insects can actually carry their pollen. The pollen actually can cling to the insect, so that way they can carry it from flower to flower to flower. It's a really good way for the flowers to keep reproducing. And that is the end of chapter 15, guys. Have a good rest of your day.